Welcome back to Recap. At the beginning of the film, a young girl named Annie Marshall is seen running away from her house, horrifying, but no visible threat. She gets in her parents' car and drives to the beach, where she tearfully tells her father on her phone that she loves him. In the morning, it is revealed that she has been brutally murdered. The film then switches to Jay, who is on a date with her new boyfriend Hugh at the movies. When they are inside the theater, Hugh spots a young girl in a yellow dress at the back of the theater. He points Jay to her, but when Jay says she can't see the girl, suddenly, he gets nervous and asks her to leave the theater. The next day, Kelly asks her about their date, and Jay tells her that Hugh acted strangely last night. On their next date, Hugh and Jay have sex in his car, but afterwards he gets something from the trunk of his car and incapacitates Jay with chloroform, causing her to pass out. When she wakes up, she finds herself in an abandoned building, confined to a wheelchair. Hugh tells her he won't hurt her and that she needs to remember what he says. He explains to her that he gave her an entity through sexual intercourse. The entity can take the form of any person and will constantly follow her location no matter where she goes. Hugh says he got the curse from a girl he had a one-night stand with. It will continue to haunt Hugh until he passes the curse on to someone else, which is why he slept with Jay. He then takes her to the corner of the building where she sees a naked woman walking towards her. He tells her she can get rid of it. She just needs to sleep with someone ASAP and pass it on. The entity is slow but not stupid. If it catches her, it will kill her and chase after him. Now this naked woman walks up to them and Hugh and Jay flee. He tells her never to go to a place that doesn't have more than one exit. We then see Kelly and her friends playing cards in front of their house when Yara asks them where Jay is. Only then, Hugh drops Jay at home in the same condition and flee from there. Then we see the police at her house and they ask her some questions. She tells them about the naked women and where Hugh lives. The next day we learn that the police can't find the naked woman or Hugh, who was living under a false identity. We then see Jay in the washroom when a ball hits her window. When she looks outside, all we see is the ball, but as she drinks the water, we see a boy looking in through the window. While at school, Jay sees an old woman in a hospital gown walking toward her, invisible to others. She gets scared to see her and leaves the class without telling anyone. Afterwards, she again sees her coming towards her in the hallway and she flees in fear. From there, she goes straight to Kelly and Paul and tells them about the old lady. She also reveals that Hugh passed it on to her. Kelly says to tell her mom what she saw, but she says no. Paul says he will stay at their house tonight and make sure nothing happens to her. Now at night when everyone is asleep, Jay comes to Paul and says she can't sleep. She sits with him on the couch and the two start talking. Then suddenly they hear the sound of breaking glass. Paul goes to investigate and tells her there is a broken window in the kitchen but no one is there. He goes upstairs to Kelly's to call the police and here Jay sees a disheveled, urinating, half-naked woman coming towards her. She is horrified to see her and runs upstairs and locks herself in her room. The others then ask her to open the door, but she says it's in the house and she saw it. Paul tries to convince her that no one is here, and then she opens the door and lets them in. They both try to calm her down, but then someone knocks on the door and tries to open it, and when Kelly opens the door, Yara is there. At that moment, we see a tall man enter her room behind Yara, and Jay gets horrified and flees the house. As she escapes, her neighbor Greg sees her. Jay comes away from home to a playground and sits on a swing. Then, after a while, Kelly and her friends also arrive there and she tells her that they will find out. Kelly then asks her what she's running away from. Later, Greg also arrives there and Jay thinks it's the same entity. But he asks them if they are okay. Now here she is telling him about Hugh and saying they have to find him. Then they all leave with Greg to find Hugh and they enter his house. His house is in a state of disrepair and just then, Paul finds Hugh's photo in a magazine. He shows the photo to Jay and they learn about his school from his jacket. They then go to his school to find out more about him, where they find out that his real name is Jeff Redmond. Moments later, they go straight to his house. Jeff's mother opens the door and Jay realizes that the naked woman she saw approaching her at the Packard plant was in the form of Mrs. Redmond. Here Jeff explains that the entity started stalking him after a one-night stand and that she can pass it on by having sex with someone else. Greg thinks his words are rubbish, to which Jeff says he's not sure either. If it kills Jay, it catches him and goes straight to whoever started it. Greg then drives them to his family's lake house. The next morning, Greg teaches Jay to shoot a revolver. Now they are all sitting on the shore of the lake during the day when Yara comes out of the bushes behind them and approaches them. But then we see that Yara is in the water and behind Jay is the entity in the form of Yara. Then this entity grabs him by the hair and the others get frightened when they see this. Paul fights it off by breaking a chair over her body. And then everyone runs away from there and comes into the garage. Jay shoots it multiple times until it falls over, but it recovers unharmed and begins pounding on the door. Then the door breaks open and Greg tells them from outside that there is nothing here. Then he goes away from there. But this entity comes there again, this time in the form of a boy who lives next to her. She escapes out the back door and drives away in Greg's car, but crashes into a cornfield. Now she wakes up in a hospital with a broken arm. She hears someone's footsteps, which scares her a lot, but it was only a nurse. Then after a while we see Greg and Jay getting intimate since he doesn't believe the entity exists. Now 3 days later, Jay asks Greg if he saw it, but he says not yet. A few days later, Jay sees the entity walking towards Greg's house in the form of Greg, and breaks a window of his house and enters. Jay tries to alert the real Greg on the phone, but he doesn't answer. She then runs into his house and finds the entity in the form of Greg's half-naked mother knocking on his door. The entity looks at her and starts knocking on the door again, and when he opens the door, it jumps on him. Jay goes there and sees the entity getting intimate with a dead Greg. After seeing this, she gets so scared that she runs away and spends the night outdoors. The next morning when she wakes up, she hears voices. She then comes to the beach and sees 3 young men on a boat. She then undresses and goes into the water. Paul, willing to take the risk, offers Jay a chance to pass it on to him, but she declines. In the next scene, we see them all in a car going somewhere. Just then, Jay sees the being standing on the roof of their house. Then they all come to a swimming pool. The group plans to kill the entity by luring it in and dropping electrical devices into the water. Jay enters the pool and everyone is waiting for this being to get there. Suddenly, Jay says that this being got there, but no one else could see it. She points to it and says she's just standing there staring at her. She then says the entity is moving and tells them she wants to come out of the pool. Instead of entering the pool, it throws the devices at Jay. She realizes that the entity has taken on the appearance of her late father. She tries to point to the entity, and while Paul is shooting at an unseen target, he accidentally wounds Yara. Now when he shoots it a second time, the bullet hit his hand and then Kelly follows Jay's instructions and cover it with a sheet. Paul then shoots him in the head, causing him to fall into the pool. Now, as Jay tries to get out of the pool, her ankle is pulled under the water. Paul shoots him in the head again and he falls to the ground, allowing Jay to escape. Approaching the pool, she sees no one but a mist of blood. Later, Jay and Paul have sex at Jay's house. That night, Paul drives through the city, passing prostitutes. Later, Jay and Paul are walking down the street holding hands as a figure walks behind them and the film ends. So, that's the end of our movie. If you've come this far, make sure to give a thumbs up and subscribe my channel. See you later.